Crucial 13, you are appreciated. Shout out to you.
Get crucial.
I'm hungry. I need some bacon.
Look at this.
Look at it. This is the city I'm in right now.
Did you know that it's been 111 years since the Titanic sank? Did you know when the Titanic sank, the United States was on the verge of a total financial reset? Did you know that the only 3 people who were in opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve died when the Titanic sunk? And because they died and there was no one to fight the Rothschilds about creating the Federal Reserve, our current financial system was able to move forward and be put in place? Did you know that the CEO of OCEANGATE, his wife, is actually a direct descendant of one of those 3 men who opposed the Federal Reserve and died on the sinking of the Titanic? Did you know the Rothschilds are suspected to have been directly involved in the tragedy of the Titanic? Did you know that David Rothschild is on the board of directors for OCEANGATE? Did you know Shahbaz Dawood is one of the richest men in Pakistan and is the vice chairman of a billion-dollar fertilizer company, as well as a member of the World Economic Forum, and also sits on the board of Prince Charles Charity Trust? Now, both he and his heir are dead, opening up his position to be filled by someone else. You realize that all of this went down during the summer solstice, which is a big sacrifice season for elites who are in the occult? Do you think it's a coincidence that someone directly related to the Titanic conspiracy is on the submersible called the Titan that is going down to visit the Titanic 111 years after it sank? We're on the verge of yet another financial reset?
No, I couldn't have said all that better myself. But now, one thing she did leave out is the fact that the Titanic was switched with a ship called the Olympic. And now I'm about to show you how and why they actually switched these ships. So hit the like button, subscribe if you ain't subscribed, and leave a comment in the box, especially if you got any new info regarding this subject. And we will also be showing you a scene from the Titanic where they took a little subliminal shot in the movie about this, these people opposing the Federal Reserve and the ship being switched and all that.
The Titanic never actually sank. Everybody knows the story of the unsinkable ship that struck an iceberg that caused it to sink, but that might not be true. Well, you see, the owners of Titanic had actually 2 ships, the Titanic and the Olympic. The Olympic was the older ship, and it took a lot of damage on previous trips. It was said that the owners wanted to get rid of the Olympic simply because it was not profitable anymore. So when the Titanic was about to set sail, the owners swapped with the Olympic and gave it a fresh coat of paint so that they recouped some of the insurance money to cover the RMS of Olympic. Furthermore, some of most powerful people that were going to be on the Titanic, such as JP Morgan, backed out of the trip minutes before its departure.
Over the years, people have spoken about Titanic and learned how it sunk on that dreadful night in April 1912. However, some people are led to believe that it was in fact its sister ship, the Olympic, that sunk as part of an insurance scam. Right here, you can see the Olympic on the left. And keep in mind, we're going to show you that this was deeper than an insurance scam. The reason behind people thinking that the ship is not really Titanic takes us back to the 20th of September 1911, when the Olympic collided with the HMS Hawk just off the coast of the Isle of Wight. This incident caused many problems for the ship's owners, White Star Line, as this meant that it would have to be taken out of service while they repaired it. But this also meant that the maiden voyage of Titanic had to be put back from the 20th of March to the 10th of April. This at the time was something that White Star Line could not afford to do, as they had legal bills to pay and the cost of repairing the Olympic as well. This meant that they had to come up with a way to claim back not only the money that they would have missed out on due to the Olympic not being in service, loss of revenue, but also the money they couldn't claim back from the incident. So they came up with a plan. The plan was simple: switch Olympic with her sister ship Titanic and sink it to claim compensation. No one would know they had swapped the ships except the people in charge: J. Bruce Ismay, Lord Peary, Thomas Andrews, and J.P. Morgan. As if you looked at the ships when they were sitting beside each other, you would not know which one was which unless you look at the name plates on both ships. So far, if you're like really like paying attention, they sent out a damaged ship knowing that it possibly or, intentionally could not make it back. So this ensured that whoever was on that boat trying to oppose the Federal Reserve, this like increased the likelihood of them not making it back on the ship. So it's easier than sending out an indestructible ship like the real Titanic. Here pictured are the guys. Top left, White Star Line Chairman J. Bruce Ismay. Bottom left, Harlan and Wolff owner Lord Peary. Top right, Chief Designer of Titanic Thomas Andrews. And bottom right, owner of White Star Line J.P. Morgan. As soon as the plan was set in motion, they went about changing the Olympic to look exactly like its sister ship by covering the floors with carpet, as the Titanic has tile flooring, and the passengers and crew who had been on the Olympic then Titanic would have been able to see the footprints left by previous passengers. If they didn't do this, people would have wondered why this brand new ship that no one had been on was covered in footprints and stains from spilled drinks. Other parts of the ship would have been changed as well. For example, taking out cabins on B deck from the actual Titanic and replace them with the Olympics promenade to make the switch that all the more believable. There is one thing that allows people to be able to tell the difference between the two ships are the potholes on the C deck. The Olympic on top, Titanic on the bottom. When the Titanic was pictured while being built, it had 14 evenly spaced portholes, but when it left Southampton on doomed maiden voyage on April 10th, 1912, it had 16 unevenly spaced portholes. This is not the only piece of evidence that can be gathered to help back up this theory. There are also people who have built the Titanic back in the shipyard, Harlan and Wolff in Belfast, that over the years had come out and said that the two ships were in fact swapped, and if they told anyone, White Star Line told them it would basically be the last job that they ever did. So obviously they would have kept quiet, but they didn't, because the families of the people who built the ship knew about the scam. Paddy Fenton is someone who had told his fellow seamen that they were in fact switched. A man in Australia sent a letter to the Northern Star newspaper on July 31st, 1996, which talks about a conversation his son had with Paddy. Here's an extract of that letter. When the surviving crew got to the port, they were all taken aside and met by two men. One in a high position in the company, the other man was in a very high position in the government. The government man read the crew the Official Secrets Act, explaining that if they told the real reason for the sinking or the rumors of an insurance scam, they would serve a minimum of 20 years in jail and would never get a job when they got out. And so far, if you see my OceanGate conspiracy video, the rabbit hole videos, this has a lot of similarities to the Titan sub that went so-called missing and imploded and then got found. Because, they ignored maintenance issues with that thing and, fired the guy who actually called it out. And you know what I mean? So, they got a history of this. J.P. Morgan was amongst many people who canceled his trip at the last minute as he was ill of health, when in actual fact he had been spotted in France 2 days later and appeared to be in perfectly well health. J. Bruce Ismay's wife, Julia, and their children also canceled due to his wife's so-called ill health. Before, however, they were spotted on a motoring holiday in Wales. I'm sick. Well, they technically weren't lying, because that ill health thing comes from low vibrational frequencies, which is energy vampire resonance and all that, and that's what they are. So they are ill-minded and sick in the head. But J.P. Morgan also has 7 valuable bronze statues removed 1 hour before the ship left Southampton. This situation leads many people to believe that they both knew what was about to happen with the ship on its maiden voyage, especially after J.P. Morgan had publicly spoke out to the country and certified that he would definitely be aboard the ship. Was the real reason behind this lie from J.P. Morgan due to the fact he knew the ship was going to sink? Sure. Another thing that has confused people is the fact that the ship named SS Californian was able to find coal when the country was in the middle of a coal strike. And then there was the fact that when it had left London, there was no passengers on board. Instead, there was a small cargo of blankets and warm clothes. Was this perhaps for the passengers and crew from Titanic? For some reason, Captain Lord did not waste any time in getting out of the port and into the North Atlantic, and the fact he didn't sell any tickets for the voyage to Boston when there would have been hundreds of people wanting to cross the Atlantic makes this seem more than likely that there had been a plan put in place to claim compensation on the ship. Now stay with me, this gets better. With Captain Lord being in a rush to get into the North Atlantic Ocean, he had left the wireless chart in which he needed behind. Of course, the SS Californian was only one of 6 ships that would have been in a 140-mile radius of Titanic. Something else that is unusual is that when the supposed Olympic was taken out of service in 1935, arriving in Jarrow, UK on the October the 13th, 1935, to be stripped and broken down, part of the wood paneling and other parts, including the aft first-class staircase, was taken and used in the White Swan Hotel, Alnwick, UK. The paneling used shows numbers on the frame that says 401. This was the number that was given to Titanic when it was being built in Belfast, Ireland. However, if the paneling had been from Olympic, the number would have been 400, not 401. Does this prove that the two ships were actually switched, or is it just perhaps a strange coincidence that both these numbers appear on the frame of the wood paneling which belonged to Olympic, or was this done on purpose to help with the cover-up of the switch? Another thing is when you look at anything to do with the advertisement for the Titanic and White Star Line, for that matter, the ship that was always used was Olympic and its interior every time they needed pictures. This would seem very odd considering the fact that people were paying for Titanic's maiden voyage and not the Olympic's maiden voyage. Was this done deliberately to help the switch? Now, as you see right here, that one at the top, that's what they claim to be the Titanic, but the one at the bottom is the actual Titanic. It looks way different, so they're comparing pictures with that Olympic ship. Now, right here, Zach Voorhees on Twitter, Google whistleblower, says, if you read the primary sources from the survivors of the Titanic, you'll see a disturbing trend. Survivor after survivor doesn't mention an iceberg. They mention an incredible explosion that rocked the ship before it sank. We've all become familiar with the phrase jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Yet no one is mentioning the obvious. Icebergs can't cut through hardened steel holes. Now it gets interesting. So why would the Titanic be blown up? Well, it turns out the industrialists opposed to the creation of the Federal Reserve were on that ship. John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Strauss, George Dunton Wyden. This is even mentioned in the movie Titanic in one scene where there are a group of people arguing against the creation of the Federal Reserve. It's extremely short, a few seconds, but it's there.
Guggenheim. Mr. Guggenheim. These are for you, Mr. Guggenheim.
Well, thank you. We have dressed in our best and are prepared to go down as gentlemen. But we would like a brandy.
I'm looking for my damn dog.
John.
Madeline asked me to look for the dog.
Now, as you see right there, they turned down life jackets, they turned down getting on boats, and they were rewritten in history as people who courageously just went down with the ship like gentlemen, when in reality they were opposing the Federal Reserve and, weren't meant to make it off that ship. Then it says here, the hull buckling in by an iceberg is actually a buckling out by an explosion. This fact can't be hidden forever, and the media is starting to tease limited disclosures to the public. Like this article says, a coal fire may have helped sink the Titanic. A new documentary claims that the Titanic's hull was weakened before it was struck by an iceberg, or was it this ship that was already damaged, called the Olympic, sent out there like this, already weakened? Who knows? To close this loophole, the internationalists are clamping down on visitation so that no unauthorized persons can visit the Titanic wreckers without a permit. It says right here, the UK and the US will now be responsible for granting permits to those wishing to visit the wreck and remove artifacts. The agreement which was signed by the United Kingdom in 2003, was ratified by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo last year. The agreement will further protect the wreck, which became a UNESCO Cultural Heritage Site in 2012. The UK will take a leading role in protecting the wreck, encouraging other North Atlantic countries like France and Canada to sign the agreement. And Zach Voorhees continues, so the fact that this submarine dude was able to offer trips at all is a little suspect. The fact he was able to do it with an uncertified experimental submarine controlled by a wireless game controller makes no sense. The additional fact that he specifically excluded hiring experienced pilots because they were 50-something white people, yet was still permitted. So what's going to happen? The people in the submarine likely perished, but I'm open to being wrong. But this event will be used as leverage to make the Titanic off limits by visitation by the citizens of the West, so that the narrative of the Federal Reserve is preserved.
You heard the theory of the Titanic and the Federal Reserve? Well, here it goes. So on the Titanic, there's some extremely wealthy passengers like J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, and the Rothschilds. But then you have Jacob Astor, the wealthiest man in the world at the time. He owned about 40% of all mortgages, and he was a Freemason who was very opposed to the idea of a central bank, whereas J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Rothschild strongly supported the idea of a central bank. So Jacob Astor was the only one standing in the way of a central bank at the time. Coincidentally, the morning the Titanic was supposed to set sail, J.P. Morgan, some Rothschilds, and others quietly exited the ship without any explanation. 5 days later, Titanic slams into an iceberg, and it starts to sink. And even though Jacob Astor is the wealthiest man in the world, he still can't find a seat in a lifeboat, and he ends up sinking with the ship. Shortly after, these guys become the wealthiest men in the world, and without Jacob Astor standing in their way, the next year in 1913, on Jekyll Island in Georgia, the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law, paving the way to print money out of thin air and completely control our monetary system. Was this a coincidence or a conspiracy?
Yes, everything in this video is not fact. This is all entertainment. As you see right here, David the Rothschild is, board of directors on OCEANGATE. Now it says right here, you are being misled about the submarine. They did not hear taps and attempts to rescue has resulted in catastrophic failure, implosion of 2 submersibles to rescue. The media wants you tuned into their fake ass broadcast. The sub is gone, according to sources that have contacted me for Canadian, U.S. Coast Guard insiders. Okay, yes, the media's spin on what this is just doesn't seem to be, just as simple as they make it seem. And it says here, the hull of the Titanic was 1 inch, 26 millimeters of steel. That puts it in the same league as an icebreaker ship whose hull ranges from 25 to 75 millimeters. Okay? And I'm like, these ships designed to be able to deal with that type of shit? I don't know. And now look at this picture right here. That thing looks like a fucking bomb hit it. Like they blew that shit off. And definitely salute to Derek Bros and Voorhees. Definitely go follow them on Twitter. And Curious Rabbit, who says right here, predatory Titanic sub CEO Stockton Rush was scouting around for rich clients to endorse his doomed expedition because he was struggling to make money on his monstrosity vessel. Financier Jay Bloom had turned down tickets aboard the submersible for him and his son Sean after fearing they wouldn't survive the trip, because they be knowing how these people get out like this, you know what I mean? Mr. Bloom said that concerns had been raised after Mr. Rush flew to Las Vegas to convince him aboard an experimental plane. Mr. Bloom said it was very concerning. The major red flag for my son was when Stockton came to see me in Las Vegas in March. So they be trying shit here and there. Like, this was probably like the 10th attempt and finally got some people on there.
This is sacred ground where people, more than 1,000 men, women, and children lost their lives. We need to put a stop to all trips to the Titanic. This is what we did when the Shuttle Challenger exploded. We shut down the entire U.S. space program. We need to do at least that now. Whether we find the vessel and determine what went wrong with this vessel, we need to stop, pause, take a deep breath, and ask people this question. Why do you want to go to the Titanic, and how do you get there safely? And I remember one of the things that hit me like a sledgehammer when I was down at the bow. We had a moment of prayer for these people. And then as you tour the bow, there's a little plaque right where the captain used to be, and it's in memory of the children who lost their lives in this wreck. This is not a looky-loo. This is not a touristy thing. This is a serious site that needs to be treated with respect.
If you are with no-till stuck on the bottom, you can survive for a while because you can stay about 4 or 5 days on the bottom, which not help very much. Because if nobody can help you, and that 5 days is with the oxygen, with the food, with the water and everything like that, but we know very well that we will die before with the temperature. Because the real problem at this depth is the temperature, because the water temperature is 33 degrees or something like that. And if you are in the sub and nothing is running anymore, making some heat, it's very cold. Even if we have some equipment and blah, 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 after a while you dive because of the cold, which is not a bad way to dive because you fall in sleep and it's not, you don't suffer in this case. We know that, but we never think that could happen, you know, it never come to our head. But the pilot has to be very careful, because especially on a wreck is a dangerous environment. When you are on the bottom, we're doing geology or biology, I will say there is no danger, no specific danger. But when you work around a wreck, it's dangerous.
I'd like to see an investigation into what happened with this submersible.
Look, I can't speak to that from here.
So there you have it. A lot of craziness surrounding this thing. We got the Federal Reserve, people in opposition to the Federal Reserve, you know, conveniently going down with the ship. The ship being switched with a more compromised and vulnerable ship. You know, the OCEANGATE ties to it. You know, the same similarities going on with that. The government, all this type of stuff. Check out all my videos on this. All of these videos I've been making tie all this in pretty well, you know. So if anybody got anything to add to any of this, any good information regarding this stuff, definitely leave a comment in the comment section. You can hit me up on Twitter at Crucial13Love, Crucial with a K, and on Instagram at Crucial13th. That's Crucial with a K, and then 13th 13th. So yeah, let me know what y'all think of in the comments. I ain't woke, I'm up.
Crucial 13, you all appreciated. Shout out to you.
Yeah, crucial.
I'm hungry. I need some bacon.
Look at this.
Look at it. This is the city I'm in right now.